Imagine being underestimated by those who only see what you have and not who you are. Now imagine that on the most important day of your child's life, the gift you brought, something simple and forgotten for years, becomes the center of a revelation that leaves everyone speechless. That's what happened to James, a humble man who, even in the face of scornful looks, managed to prove that real value lies not in money, but in the stories we carry. Do you want to know how one painting changed the future of two families forever? Stay with me, because the ending of this story will surprise you in a way you never imagined. "Are you ready, Dad?" Matthias asked as he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, his reflection revealing James's pensive figure in the background. James blinked a few times before answering, trying to mask the unease that weighed heavily on his chest. "I think so, son. I'm just wondering what it will be like to meet Hannah's parents." Matthias turned around, worried by his father's hesitant tone. "There's nothing to worry about. They'll love you. Hannah always talks about how amazing you are, and everything you've done for me." James forced a smile, but his gaze flitted to the floor. "Admiring is one thing, accepting is another. I know how some people look at me when they find out what I do for a living." Matthias took a few steps forward, placing his hands on his father's shoulders. "Father, please, you're the most honorable man I know. What they think doesn't matter. You're the reason I'm here today, about to marry the woman I love." James sighed, trying to convince himself of his son's words. He tidied up his shirt collar one last time and muttered something about leaving soon so they wouldn't be late. Matthias realized that his father was more worried than he had admitted, but decided not to press the issue. In the car, silence enveloped them for several minutes, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was as if words weren't necessary, even though the weight of expectations was there. Finally, Matthias tried to break the mood. "Dad, trust me, Marcus and Beatrice can seem a bit rigid at times, but deep down they're good people." James just nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. He wanted to believe his son, but something inside him told him that the evening wouldn't be so simple. The luxury of the house they were about to arrive at was already something he couldn't identify with. When they arrived, they were greeted by Beatrice, impeccable in her elegance, with a rehearsed smile. Her eyes assessed James for a split second before she extended her hand. "You must be the famous James. How nice to finally meet you." "It's my pleasure," James replied, shaking her hand as firmly as he saw fit. Marcus appeared soon after, his dominant posture and cordial expression contributing to a welcome that was more theatrical than genuine. "Welcome, James. I hope you had a good trip." "Yes, very good. Thank you," said James, making an effort to look at ease. The initial conversations were trivial, but all it took was for Marcus to ask, "So, James, what do you do?" for discomfort to set in. "I'm a janitor at a university," replied James, his voice calm but firm. The silence that followed was piercing. Beatrice smiled, but Marcus arched an eyebrow and replied in a condescending tone, "Oh, I see. Well, it's an important job." In the car on the way back, Matthias broke the silence. "Dad, I'm sorry for their behavior. They have no right to treat you like that." James sighed. "Don't worry, son. People like that don't define who we are." "So, James, what do you do?" asked Marcus, his fork hanging in the air as his eyes assessed every detail of the guest sitting in front of him. James didn't hesitate. "I'm a janitor at a university." The silence that followed was as thick as the smell of the wine on the table. Beatrice cast a quick glance at Marcus, trying to mask her surprise. She forced a smile and commented, "Ah, interesting. An essential job, no doubt." "Essential, yes," agreed Marcus, but there was something in his tone that made Matthias, sitting next to his father, clench his fist under the table. He kept quiet, but he could feel his blood boiling. The conversation took a safer turn, with Beatrice praising the wedding flowers and Hannah trying to soften the mood. but it was clear that the focus had shifted. With every pause, Marcus' gaze fell on James, as if he were assessing something invisible. Beatrice leaned forward a little, the smile on her face still tense. "And what have you brought as a present for the bride and groom, James? I'm sure it will be something unique." James remained calm, his eyes resting on Matthias for a brief moment before he answered. "I'm still finalizing the details. I want it to be special." "Special?" Beatrice repeated with a light laugh. "Well, you don't have to worry so much. I'm sure Matthias and Hannah will appreciate anything." The condescending tone didn't go unnoticed by Matthias, but before he could intervene, James stepped in. "I'm sure they will. It's the love between them that makes everything important." Hannah glanced nervously at Matthias, as if asking him not to react. He nodded almost imperceptibly, but his heart was still racing. James, on the other hand, seemed unperturbed, his face as serene as ever. After dessert, as dinner drew to a close, Marcus addressed James again, now in a more casual tone. "It must be interesting to work at a university. I imagine you see a lot of young people preparing for the future." James nodded. "Yes, I do. Many of them remind me of what it's like to start small and work hard. It's inspiring." Marcus arched his eyebrows, as if he hadn't expected that answer. "Admirable," he said, but his expression showed something else. The conversation continued, but the disconnect between James and his hosts became clear. Matthias remained attentive, increasingly annoyed by the questions that to him sounded less like curiosity and more like disguised judgments. When the evening was finally over, Hannah escorted the guests to the door. "I'm sorry for my parents' insistence," she murmured discreetly to Matthias. "Don't worry," he replied with a forced smile. "They won't ruin it for us." Beatrice and Marcus thanked James and Matthias for their presence, their smiles still calculated. After the door had closed, Beatrice turned to her husband. "A janitor. I hope he at least has good taste when it comes to choosing a present." In the car, Matthias could no longer contain his frustration. How do they have the nerve to act like that? "Dad, that was awful." James smiled slightly, looking at the road ahead. "Don't let it consume you, son. Respect doesn't come from words, but from attitudes. Let's focus on what matters. You and Hannah are starting something beautiful together." "But they acted as if you weren't worthy of being there," Matthias retorted, still overcome with indignation. "They have their ideas," James replied calmly. "But that doesn't define me, Matthias. What matters is what we do, not what they think." Matthias didn't reply immediately. He looked out of the window, the silence returning, but now charged with a new determination. He knew his father deserved more respect, but he also deeply admired his resilience. "How many times have you felt that your story has been underestimated, as if what really matters is invisible? Like James, you carry years of experiences and overcomes that prove how strong you are. But perhaps, in the midst of the routine, you have forgotten that there is still room for a new beginning to rewrite your love story. That's why I want to give you something special. The ebook, The Secret of Mature Romance Stories, made for women like you who know that love can become even more intense with time. And for the first ones who access it, it's my gift, totally free. Don't miss this opportunity to rediscover your passion and transform your life. The link is here. Click now and start this new chapter." "Finally," he murmured. "You deserve better than that, Dad." James just smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. Despite the tense night, something inside him was already starting to move, an idea taking shape. James was sitting in the armchair in the living room, his gaze fixed on the painting on the wall in front of him. It depicted a forest bathed in the golden light of dawn, something so familiar that it seemed to carry decades of stories in its lines and colors. He rested his chin on his hand, deep in thought. "Dad, is everything all right?" Matthias asked, interrupting the silence as he entered the room. James kept his eyes on the painting. I was thinking about the present I should bring to the wedding. Hannah's parents asked about it yesterday. The present? Matthias repeated, frowning. You know you don't have to worry about that. Hannah and I don't care about such things. James smiled slightly, but there was something else in his countenance, a weight that Matthias recognized well. I know that, son, but I'm not worried about you. I want the gift to be special, something that represents what matters to me and to us. Matthias followed his father's gaze to the painting. Are you thinking of the painting? That one. He pointed, surprised. James nodded slowly. That painting has been in our family for generations. My father used to say that it symbolized the strength and sacrifices that brought us here. I always thought it was just a reminder, but now I see that it's more. Matthias walked over to the painting, looking at the details. Although he had never paid much attention to it, at that moment it seemed more vivid, almost pulsating. His eyes landed on the discreet signature in the bottom corner. Victor Aragon. That name, Aragon, sounds important. Have you done any research on him? Matthias asked. It never crossed my mind. For me, the value has always been emotional, not material, James replied, crossing his arms. Maybe there's something else there. Matthias leaned over to take a closer look at the signature, but James stood up and walked over to the painting with determination. Maybe there is, he admitted. He carefully removed the painting from the wall, as if he were holding something of great value. But it's not about that. It's about what it represents. Placing it on the table, James took a clean cloth and began to wipe the glass. Each movement was slow and deliberate, as if he were reliving memories with each line revealed. Matthias remained silent, watching his father with admiration. It looks new now, James commented, analyzing the painting's renewed glow. For so long, I've left it just as decoration. But now, I can see that it's the perfect present. Are you sure? Matthias asked, still reluctant. This painting means a lot to you. James smiled. And that's exactly why it should be given to you. I want it to be part of the beginning of a new story. Matthias remained silent, absorbing his father's words. It was a decision he knew was important, but something inside him still made him hesitate. That evening, after Matthias had gone to his room, James remained in the living room. Sitting next to the painting, he looked again at Victor Aragon's signature and muttered to himself, maybe it's more than we realize. But above all, it's the legacy that matters. He felt a calm come over him, as if he had finally found the answer. The painting wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol that carried all of his family's history and love. The wedding day dawned with a clear sky, and the light breeze seemed to carry promises of a perfect start. James put on his best suit, adjusting his tie with fingers that, although calm on the outside, carried the tension of someone about to face a big moment. Next to him, Matthias watched in silence, respecting his father's space. When they arrived at the venue, the grandeur of the decoration immediately caught their attention. Lush flowers adorned every corner, while an immense chandelier hung over the main hall, reflecting the sun's rays like diamonds. It was much more extravagant than Matthias and Hannah had imagined, but James kept his expression serene, believing that it was all for the good of the bride and groom. Marcus was the first to greet him. James, I'm glad you could make it." His smile seemed polite, but there was something in his posture that still carried judgment. "Of course I came. It's the most important day of my son's life," James replied, with a calmness that contrasted with the energy in the room. Beatrice approached soon after, looking impeccable in her light-colored dress. "And the present? I bet you brought something special," she commented, her words masked by a tone of irony that she tried to disguise. James smiled slightly, unperturbed. "Yes, something very important to me. I hope it's special for them too." The guests, many of whom were friends of Hannah's family, circulated around the hall, exchanging greetings and restrained laughter. As the ceremony approached, everyone took their seats, and the focus turned completely to the bride and groom. Matthias and Hannah looked at each other at the end of the aisle, their expressions of pure love shining through to everyone present. When they exchanged vows, their heartfelt words brought tears to the eyes of even the least emotional. James, sitting at the back, felt his chest fill with pride as he listened to his son promise eternal love. After the I do's, applause echoed through the hall, and the bride and groom made their way to the reception. There, between speeches and toasts, Marcus took the initiative to open the speeches, extolling the grandeur of the celebration he and Beatrice had provided. "This is a day worthy of our beloved daughter Hannah. Everything has been done to make this moment perfect." He raised his glass, drawing applause from the guests. Then he turned to James. "Now we'd like to hear a few words from the groom's father." James stood up, feeling everyone's eyes on him. Clearing his throat, he began, "First, I want to say how happy I am to be here, celebrating the love of my son and Hannah. For me, that's what really matters, the love they share." After a brief pause, he continued, "I've brought you a present. It may not be as grand as everything else here, but it carries something very valuable, our history." With a gesture, he called one of the employees, who brought the wrapped painting. As he took it out of the paper, Victor Aragon's painting was revealed. Silence filled the room. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Then a voice from the back broke the silence. "And that's an original Victor Aragon," exclaimed one of the guests, a well-known art expert. The reaction was immediate. Guests stood up to take a closer look, whispering about the discovery. Beatrice and Marcus exchanged astonished glances, clearly not expecting something like this. "An Aragon," muttered Marcus, trying to absorb the impact of the information. "Yes," replied James calmly. "This painting has been in my family for generations. For me, it's more than art. It's a symbol of everything that brought us here." Matthias approached, visibly moved, and put a hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, this is incredible. I can't thank you enough." While the guests continued to murmur about the painting, Beatrice tried to pull herself together. "James, we seem to have underestimated you. This gift is impressive." James replied with a simple smile. "Thank you. But the real value isn't in the price. It's in what it means." The atmosphere had changed. What had once been judgment had now turned to admiration, and James, with his unwavering serenity, had managed to turn the narrative without the need for harsh words. The hall was still full of whispered voices as the guests continued to admire Victor Aragon's painting. Marcus and Beatrice, still stunned, tried to adjust their expressions to something that looked more worthy of refined hosts. Hannah, however, could no longer hold in her frustration. She approached her parents, her serious expression contrasting with the smile she had displayed during the ceremony. "You owe James an apology," she said, her voice low enough for only them to hear. "Hannah, darling, this is no time for—" Beatrice began, but Hannah interrupted her. "It's exactly the right time. You judged him before you even met him, as if he were less because of the work he does. And now that you've discovered the value of the painting, you're trying to change the tone. That's shameful." Marcus adjusted his tie, uncomfortable. "It wasn't our intention to disrespect you." "But that's what you did," Hannah retorted, "and you know it." Beatrice lowered her eyes, finally realizing the weight of her daughter's words. "You're right. We underestimated James, and that was wrong. Let's make it right." Meanwhile, James remained at the back of the room, observing the interaction with a calm that seemed unshakable. Matthias stood next to him, still visibly moved by his father's gesture. "Dad, you knew they'd react like that, didn't you?" Matthias asked. James shrugged, smiling slightly. "I didn't know the painting would have such an impact, but I thought it might change a few things." It changed a lot more than a few things. Matthias squeezed James's shoulder gratefully. That gesture was beyond any gift we could have imagined. Hannah approached at that moment, her eyes still shining with determination. "James, I need to thank you again. Not only did you give us something precious, but you taught us an important lesson today." "I didn't do anything," James replied humbly. "I just gave you something that has always been valuable to me. What matters is what it means to you now." The three of them remained silent for a moment, absorbing the impact of the moment. In the background, the guests began to resume the party, but the painting remained the center of attention, temporarily hanging in a prominent place in the hall. Later, as the last guests were saying goodbye, Hannah and Matthias took James to a quieter corner. "We're going to put the painting in a special place in our house. It will be a constant reminder of what really matters," said Hannah, holding James's hand. "And also of who you are, Dad," added Matthias, his voice breaking. "An example of strength, humility, and love." James nodded, moved, but before he could reply, Hannah continued, "My father and mother want to talk to you." Beatrice and Marcus approached with hesitant steps. Beatrice was the first to speak. "James, we want to apologize. We acted in a prejudiced way, and that wasn't fair. You showed us something we didn't even know we needed to learn." "I hope we can start again," added Marcus, holding out his hand. James looked at them for a moment before shaking Marcus's hand. "Respect is built over time. I'm willing to take that step if you are." Hannah's parents nodded, and for the first time that evening, it felt like a bridge had been created between the two families. Not perfect, but a start. In the days that followed, the painting was hung prominently in Matthias and Hannah's new home. They decided to research Victor Aragon further, discovering that his works were known for capturing the essence of resilience and rebirth. It was as if the history of the painting was intrinsically linked to that of James and his family. One morning, while Matthias and Hannah were admiring the painting, Matthias commented, "It doesn't matter what it's worth financially. This painting is a piece of our history." Hannah nodded, smiling. "And a reminder of what really matters: values, sacrifices, and the love we share." A few months later, when the couple's first child was born, they decided to name him Victor, after the artist and the legacy he symbolized. James was the first to hold the baby, tears in his eyes as he whispered, "Welcome to the family, little Victor. May you always remember what really matters." And so, Victor Aragon's painting not only changed the course of that evening, but became an enduring symbol of unity, values, and the power of a gesture made from the heart.